The older you get, the more dangerous this question becomes. Not what do you want? Not what are your dreams? But this, what happens to a human being when they spend 30 years waking up for a life they secretly do not love? Most people never answer that question honestly, because deep down they already know. They feel it every Sunday night, in the silence of the morning commute, in the exhaustion that sleep never fixes, in the strange emptiness of achieving things that no longer mean anything. And the terrifying part is, from the outside, their life often looks completely normal. A stable job, responsibilities handled, bills paid, family photos smiling from the wall. But somewhere along the way, their spirit quietly left the room. And that is why Steve Jobs once said, "The only way to do great work is to love what you do." Most people hear that as motivational advice, but it wasn't motivation. It was a warning, because there is a hidden psychological cost to spending your life disconnected from your own soul. And almost nobody talks about it. Not when you are young. Not when society is teaching you to survive instead of teaching you how to live. When you are younger, you can tolerate misalignment. Your body still has energy. Your future still feels infinite. You believe you can figure it out later. So you ignore the small signals, the fatigue, the resentment, the quiet envy toward people who seem genuinely alive, the feeling that every Monday steals another piece of you. At first, it seems harmless. You tell yourself, this is adulthood. This is responsibility. No one really loves what they do. And for a while, that story works. Because survival is loud, but the soul whispers, especially in your 20s and 30s. Life rewards endurance more than awareness. You learn how to function while emotionally numb. You learn how to smile while exhausted. You learn how to become useful to everyone except yourself. And the frightening thing is, the world often rewards this behavior. People praise reliability, sacrifice, obedience, productivity, even if it slowly destroys the person underneath. So years pass, and one day, you wake up tired in a way that sleep cannot repair. Not physically, existentially, a deeper exhaustion, the exhaustion of becoming a stranger to yourself. There is a reason so many people feel emotionally lost after 40. It is not simply aging. It is accumulated self-betrayal. Tiny compromises repeated for decades. Ignoring intuition, postponing dreams, suppressing curiosity, living according to practicality while starving psychologically. Behavioral psychology calls this cognitive dissonance, the pain that emerges when your external life no longer matches your internal truth. And humans can endure this mismatch for an astonishingly long time, but not forever. Eventually, the mind begins sending signals: irritability, restlessness, chronic anxiety, emotional numbness, quiet depression disguised as being tired. Some people mistake this for laziness. It is not laziness. A human being cannot feel deeply energized by a life that requires them to emotionally disappear every day. And yet millions do exactly that. Not because they are weak, because fear is powerful. Fear of instability, fear of judgment, fear of disappointing family, fear of starting over, fear that it may already be too late. So they continue. And slowly, a terrible thing happens. They stop asking themselves what they love, because asking hurts too much. When a dream feels unreachable long enough, the brain protects itself by pretending the dream never mattered. That is one of the saddest defense mechanisms in human psychology. Not failing, forgetting what once made you feel alive. You can see it in people's eyes sometimes, especially late at night, when the distractions fade. A man sitting in his parked car for 10 extra minutes before going inside. A woman staring silently out the kitchen window after everyone sleeps. Someone scrolling endlessly through videos. Not because they are entertained, but because they are avoiding themselves. Modern life has become incredibly efficient at helping people escape their own inner voice. Noise everywhere. Constant stimulation. Constant comparison. Constant urgency. But beneath all of it, there is often one painful realization quietly waiting. I built a life that looks stable, but does not feel meaningful. And meaning matters more than people think. Far more. Viktor Frankl once wrote that humans can endure almost any suffering if they possess meaning. But the reverse is also true. Without meaning, even comfortable lives begin to feel unbearable. This is why some wealthy people are miserable, why some successful people secretly collapse emotionally, why some people achieve everything they once wanted and still feel empty. Because achievement without emotional connection becomes psychological starvation. The soul does not measure life in salaries or status. It measures life in aliveness. And this is where the quote becomes uncomfortable. The only way to do great work is to love what you do. Notice he did not say, the only way to become rich, or famous, or admired. He said great work, because greatness is not merely external success. Greatness is what happens when effort and identity finally align. When the work stops feeling like performance and starts feeling like expression, that changes everything psychologically. A person who genuinely loves their craft experiences pain differently. Long hours feel different. Sacrifice feels different. Failure feels different. Because suffering attached to meaning becomes bearable, even purposeful. A father working 2 jobs for his children can endure exhaustion differently than someone trapped in meaningless labor. An artist struggling financially may still feel internally alive. A teacher under pressure may continue because their work touches something deeper than money. Meaning transforms endurance. Without meaning, discipline feels like punishment. With meaning, discipline becomes devotion. But here is the truth most people avoid. Loving what you do does not mean feeling happy all the time. That fantasy has destroyed many people. They chase emotional highs instead of meaningful direction. Real love for one's work is often quiet. It survives boredom, repetition, difficulty, uncertainty. In fact, sometimes the deepest sign you love something is that you are willing to suffer for it voluntarily. That is what modern culture misunderstands. People think passion always feels exciting. It does not. Sometimes passion feels heavy, lonely, obsessive, demanding. Sometimes it isolates you from others. Because when a person finally discovers meaningful work, they change. Their priorities shift. Their tolerance for superficial living decreases. Their awareness sharpens. And this can become deeply uncomfortable, especially if everyone around them remains asleep emotionally. There is a strange loneliness that comes with becoming conscious of your own wasted potential. You begin noticing how many conversations revolve around distraction instead of truth. How many people are surviving instead of living. How often society rewards image over substance. And suddenly, you no longer fit into your old life the same way. That transition terrifies people, not because transformation is impossible, but because identity death feels frightening. The human brain prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar possibility. This is why so many people stay trapped in lives they secretly resent. Not because they cannot change, because changing threatens the identity they spent decades building. Think about that carefully. A man may hate his career, yet still cling to it because his entire identity depends on being the responsible one. A woman may suppress her creative gifts for years because practicality became her survival mechanism. Some people become so attached to who they had to become, they never discover who they actually are. And over time, this creates bitterness. Not always loud bitterness, quiet bitterness. The kind that leaks into conversations, into marriages, into parenting, into the way people speak about life itself. You hear it in phrases like, "That's just how life is. Dreams don't pay bills. You'll understand when you get older." But sometimes, those sentences are not wisdom. They are grief disguised as realism. The grief of a person who abandoned themselves too many times. And maybe the cruelest part is this. The world rarely notices immediately when someone loses themselves. Because externally, life continues. People still go to work. still attend birthdays, still smile in photos. Meanwhile, internally, something is fading, not dramatically, quietly, like a light dimming year after year, until eventually the person forgets they were ever bright to begin with. This is why discipline alone is not enough. That may sound surprising, especially in a culture obsessed with productivity. Discipline without meaning eventually becomes emotional imprisonment. Yes, discipline matters deeply. Consistency matters. Responsibility matters. But if your discipline only helps you maintain a life that is slowly killing your spirit, then your discipline is serving fear, not purpose. And many people sense this intuitively. That is why they feel exhausted even after accomplishing things. Because achievement disconnected from identity creates emptiness instead of fulfillment. The external world calls it success. The nervous system calls it survival. There comes a moment in many people's lives, usually later than they expected, when they begin asking different questions. Not, how do I impress people? But, what kind of life allows me to respect myself? Not, how do I avoid failure? But, what pain am I willing to endure for something meaningful? Those questions change a person, because maturity eventually reveals something uncomfortable. Every life contains suffering anyway. No one escapes difficulty. No one escapes sacrifice. No one escapes uncertainty. The real question is whether your suffering is connected to something that matters to you. A meaningful struggle strengthens identity. A meaningless struggle erodes it. That distinction changes mental health more than people realize. Psychologists often speak about burnout as overwork. But sometimes burnout is not working too hard. Sometimes burnout is spending years forcing yourself to care about things your soul never truly connected with. That kind of exhaustion becomes existential. You are not merely tired from effort. You are tired from pretending. And pretending is expensive, emotionally expensive. The body keeps records of unlived truth. Stress accumulates. Anxiety deepens. Motivation disappears. Eventually, people begin medicating the emptiness with distractions, shopping, alcohol, endless entertainment, constant busyness, anything to avoid the silence where the real questions live. Because silence is dangerous. Silence forces honesty, and honesty can dismantle entire identities. A man may suddenly realize he pursued status because he desperately wanted validation from a father who never gave it. A woman may realize she spent decades prioritizing everyone except herself because she confused self-sacrifice with love. Someone may discover they never actually chose their life consciously at all. They simply inherited expectations. And once you see that, you cannot completely unsee it. This is why awakening often feels painful before it feels liberating. The first stage of self-awareness is grief. Grief for wasted years. Grief for ignored intuition. Grief for the version of yourself that slowly disappeared while trying to survive. Many people avoid transformation because they fear failure. But often the deeper fear is mourning the life they could have lived. Still, something extraordinary can happen when a person finally reconnects with meaningful work. Not overnight, not magically, but gradually. Their energy changes. Not because life becomes easier, but because resistance inside them decreases. There is less internal war. The mind no longer wakes up every morning negotiating against itself. And this creates a different kind of discipline, a quieter discipline, not fueled by shame, not fueled by comparison, not fueled by panic, but by alignment. That is powerful, because sustainable transformation rarely comes from self-hatred. It comes from finally feeling connected to something real. This is why some older people suddenly reinvent themselves at 50 or 60 or beyond, not because they became fearless, because they finally became more afraid of wasting the remainder of their life. Time changes people, especially once mortality stops feeling theoretical. At 25, people think they have endless time. At 45, they begin noticing funerals more often, parents aging, children growing, their own reflection changing quietly each year. And suddenly the future no longer feels infinite. That realization can either destroy a person or awaken them, because nothing clarifies priorities faster than understanding time is limited. Stoic philosophy understood this deeply. The Stoics constantly reflected on death not because they were pessimistic, but because awareness of mortality sharpens life. When you realize your years are finite, trivial things begin losing power. Ego weakens, comparison weakens, people's opinions weaken, and one question becomes impossible to ignore. If my life ended sooner than expected, would I be proud of how I spent my days? That question cuts through illusion brutally, because at the end of life, humans rarely regret not appearing successful enough. They regret abandonment of self, the unlived life, the postponed dream, the words never spoken, the courage never attempted. And perhaps that is what Steve Jobs truly meant. Not simply, find a fun career, but do not spend your existence disconnected from your own aliveness, because eventually the cost becomes unbearable. The tragedy is not failing. Failure can teach. Failure can refine identity. Failure can deepen wisdom. The real tragedy is emotional resignation, when a person silently accepts a life that no longer feels alive and stops believing they deserve more. That resignation spreads quietly into posture, into relationships, into health, into the atmosphere of a home. Children feel it. Partners feel it. Even strangers sometimes feel it. Humans radiate their internal condition more than they realize. And the opposite is also true. A person connected to meaningful purpose carries a different presence. Not necessarily louder, but more grounded, more awake. Even tired eyes can look alive when the soul still has direction. You see it in craftsmen, teachers, writers, gardeners, builders, parents who genuinely care, people whose work reflects part of who they are. There is dignity in that. A calm dignity modern culture often overlooks because it worships visibility instead of depth. But deep down, most humans are not truly searching for luxury. They are searching for meaning, for self-respect, for inner congruence, for the feeling that their existence matters beyond survival. And maybe that journey begins smaller than people imagine. Not dramatic reinvention overnight. Sometimes it begins with honesty, admitting, I am not okay living this way forever. That sentence alone can change a life, because clarity creates tension. Once you stop lying to yourself, your old life becomes harder to tolerate unconsciously. And then small changes begin. Protecting your energy differently, using time differently, listening to yourself again, creating instead of only consuming, saying no more often, becoming willing to disappoint others rather than continuously abandoning yourself. That process is rarely glamorous. Often it is lonely, especially in the beginning, because people around you may not understand your transformation. Some will mock it, some will fear it, some will subtly pressure you back into your old identity, not because they hate you, because your courage forces them to confront their own compromises. And many people would rather criticize change than question themselves. But eventually, something shifts internally. You stop measuring life only through external approval. And for the first time in years, you begin feeling present again. Small moments matter more. Conversations deepen. Work feels less hollow. Your nervous system softens. Not because life became perfect, but because you are finally participating in your own existence instead of merely enduring it. That is a form of freedom few people experience. And interestingly, it often looks very ordinary from the outside. Quiet mornings, focused work, intentional living, less noise, less performance, less desperation, a different pace, a different relationship with time. Because once a person reconnects with meaning, they stop trying to outrun themselves. They stop needing constant distraction. Peace becomes more valuable than image. Depth becomes more valuable than attention. And slowly, the emptiness that once haunted them begins losing power. Maybe that is the deepest truth hidden inside the quote. Loving what you do is not only about career satisfaction. It is about preserving your humanity, protecting the part of yourself that still feels alive in a world constantly trying to reduce humans into machines of productivity and obligation. And yes, responsibility matters. Bills matter. Family matters. Survival matters. But so does your soul. Because a person who completely abandons themselves in the name of responsibility eventually has nothing emotionally healthy left to give others. That is why self-respect matters. Not narcissism, not selfishness, self-respect. The courage to believe your inner life deserves attention too. The courage to admit that your time on earth matters. The courage to stop living entirely for appearances while dying quietly inside. Most people wait too long to learn that lesson. Some never do. But those who finally understand it often describe the experience the same way. It feels less like becoming someone new, and more like returning to someone they lost a long time ago. So tonight, while the world stays noisy, while millions continue rushing through lives they barely feel connected to, maybe sit with one uncomfortable question. Not, what would impress people, but what kind of work, what kind of life would allow me to feel fully awake before I die? And maybe the answer will not arrive immediately. That is okay. The important thing is becoming honest enough to ask. Because the moment a human being stops betraying themselves internally, their transformation has already begun. Quietly, almost invisibly, like the first light appearing before sunrise. And perhaps that is where all meaningful change truly starts. Not with hype, not with confidence, not with certainty, but with one deeply human decision: to stop abandoning your own soul.